There was once a man who remembered too much, not because he was cursed or gifted or wired differently from the rest of us, but because one day, long ago, in the quiet corner of an ordinary life, he made a decision, a small one, the kind you don't even notice you're making until years later it starts to shape your spine and whisper through your sleep. He decided to remember everything, not out loud, not with some grand gesture or vow before the stars, just a quiet refusal deep inside his bones. I will not forget. It started the day his mother forgot to pick him up from school. An hour sitting on the curb, knees to chest, watching the shadows grow long like waiting fingers. It wasn't the forgetting that hurt. It was the feeling of being erased, like a smudge on the world. He told himself, this will never happen again. I will hold on to everything, even the pain. He began to collect tiny things at first. The sound of chalk on the blackboard, the color of the sky when it rained and no one noticed, the exact pattern of his father's footsteps down the hall. He kept journals, boxes of them, dated, labeled, cross-referenced. By the time he was 12, his room looked less like a child's and more like an archive. Each object, each drawing, each folded note from classmates preserved, a museum of fleeting moments. But memory is not just about storing, it's about weight, and what he didn't know, what none of us really understand until it's far too late, is that memory is heavy. It settles in the corners of your mind like dust, and dust becomes sediment, and sediment becomes stone. You don't notice the weight at first, not until you try to run, or breathe, or sleep. By 16, he remembered the precise words of every insult he had ever received. By 20, he could close his eyes and replay every conversation, every glance, every silence. Nothing was forgotten, but nothing was forgiven either. To forgive, after all, is to forget a little, to let the sharpness blur, to soften the edge. But his edges never softened. They sharpened with time. Sometimes, in the mirror, he swore he could see the past layering. Behind his eyes, 1,000 faces staring out from behind his own. He began to dream in memories, not metaphors, not symbols, literal memories, frame by frame, unedited. There was no longer a boundary between remembering and reliving. Time became a spiral, folding in on itself. He wasn't aging, he was accumulating. He carried every goodbye he'd ever said, every goodbye he never got to say, and worst of all, every hello that never meant what he thought it did. He remembered the smiles that were lies, the promises that were habits, the friendships that were transactions dressed in warmth. And because he remembered everything, he trusted nothing, but he kept going, writing, recording, storing. His life in shelves and drives and whispers to himself in the dark. He told himself it was for truth, that memory was truth, that to forget was to betray reality. But truth, like memory, is a weight, and eventually, even truth will crush you. They say the brain isn't made to hold forever. It's made to fade. That memories aren't stone tablets, but waves meant to crash, dissolve, and return in fragments when needed. But he did not believe in fragments. He wanted clarity. He wanted permanence. He wanted to make memory sacred, whole, untouched by time. So he kept building, first with notebooks, then cameras, then wires, drives, and blinking machines. He wired his house with microphones, synced his vision to cloud backups, set hourly reminders to speak his thoughts aloud, to be captured and indexed. His life became a stream of documentation. He didn't speak to people, he narrated them. And when his own mind grew full, when dreams turned into bloated tapestries, of everything he had ever seen, he created the archive, a room underground. No windows, no clocks, just screens. Shelves, a hum that never stopped. There, he fed every second of his life into machines built to never forget. He stopped living and began curating. But there is a price to cataloging your soul. He began to see patterns where none existed, repeating expressions, recursions in tone, loops in language. He realized that people often say the same things with slightly different clothes on. Love, for example, was almost always, "I see you. I choose you, please stay," said in hundreds of ways, but always the same shape underneath. And once he knew the patterns, he couldn't unsee them. He began to hear rehearsals instead of sincerity, scripts instead of moments. He stopped believing in originality. He stopped believing in spontaneity. He stopped believing in now. And worse, he began to doubt his own memories. You see, when you record everything, you lose the blur, the gentle smudging that gives warmth to the past. He would compare recordings of laughter to what he thought he remembered, and they were never the same. Her voice was softer in his mind, the sunset redder, the goodbye more poetic. But the recording was cold, unforgiving, real dot to real dot. So he began to mistrust his own mind. What was real? What was imagined? What was rewritten by nostalgia, loneliness, or hope? He became a prisoner in a palace of mirrors, each memory reflecting back a slightly different self. And he began to ask the question that always waits at the end of obsessive remembering. If I can't trust my memory, can I trust my identity? And so, slowly, he stopped being a man. He became a record, a reflection, a playback, a copy of a copy, endlessly folding in on itself. He stopped sleeping, because dreams are messy, and he feared they would contaminate the archive. He stopped loving, because love is chaotic, and he could not risk misremembering something so fragile. He stopped creating, because creation requires forgetting what came before. But most of all, he stopped forgetting, and without forgetting, there is no wonder, no renewal, no rebirth, only dust. By now, he no longer lived in the world. He lived in the archive, an ever-expanding labyrinth of labeled memories, stored not just in machines, but in his blood, his breath, his bones. Every hallway was a decade, every drawer a failure, every screen a flickering version of the life he could never leave behind. It wasn't a home, it wasn't a sanctuary, it was a museum of regret, and he was both the curator and the exhibit. He walked the corridors alone, tracing the outlines of lost time. Here was the birthday where no one showed up. Here was the night she left and never came back. Here was the look in his father's eyes, the one that said, "Without words, you are not enough." He remembered the exact phrasing, the syllables, the pauses, the sound of the silence afterward, too. Most people, pain fades. Time dulls the sharp edges, and mercy returns, like grass after fire. But not for him. His pain stayed fresh, sharpened by repetition, preserved like a wound sealed in amber dot. Every mistake he ever made, every cruel word, every missed opportunity, every time he turned away when he should have reached out, they played on a loop, and he watched. He watched himself fail, over and over and over. He tried to edit, to erase, to delete the worst moments. But the mind doesn't work like a hard drive, and the soul keeps backup copies. What we try to forget, we carry in shadows. He built a room called the Hall of Apologies. It contained every sorry he never said, and every one he wished he'd never accepted. He recorded new ones just in case. Apologies he might need someday, to people he'd hurt, to people he'd never even met. I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I kept talking when you were breaking. I'm sorry I remembered everything except how to be kind. The room grew crowded. Eventually he stopped leaving the archive altogether. He stopped answering messages, stopped checking the date. He no longer trusted the world outside because it changed, and change meant forgetting, and forgetting meant weakness. So he remained among the cold, unblinking machines that never forgot and never forgave. One night though, in truth, there were no nights anymore, just the artificial dusk of a place without sky. He stood before the first recording he ever made, a shaky, childish voice, describing the sound of his mother's voice, her laugh, the way she smelled like cinnamon and soap. It was wrong, it was incomplete, faded, warped by old tech and time. And in that moment, he realized something that stopped his breath. Even memory forgets. The tapes degrade, the files corrupt, the mind rewrites. Time erodes. No matter how much he tried to preserve, he was losing pieces, slowly, inevitably. And for the first time in decades, he felt something he could not name. It wasn't relief, it wasn't terror, it was something like grief. There comes a moment in the life of every collector when they look at what they've gathered and see a graveyard. He stood in the archive, surrounded by perfect, dying memories, and for the first time in his life, he asked a forbidden question. What if I let go? It began as a whisper, a flicker of rebellion in a mind trained for order. He stopped recording himself, brushing his teeth. He left one journal page blank. He deleted a file, a trivial one. The lunch he ate on a rainy Tuesday 12 years ago, and nothing happened. The sky didn't collapse. His body didn't shudder. The earth remained still. He was free. For a second, so he tried again. Deleted an hour. Then a day, he burned a box of letters from someone he never really loved. He smashed an old hard drive with recordings of meaningless conversations. Each deletion was a tremor, and each tremor gave him a little more breath, but the archive didn't. Like it, the machines blinked, glitched, searched for missing data and panicked warnings, flooded his walls, error, incomplete sequence. Memory gap detected, integrity compromised. Even his body reacted. He would wake in sweats, hallucinating forgotten faces. He'd feel conversations echoing without words, ghosts of things once remembered, now undone. The silence of forgetting felt haunted. Still, he pushed forward. He began erasing more, bigger moments, birthdays, breakups, laughter that once mattered. Sometimes the pain went with them. Sometimes it did in single quotes. He learned something horrifying. You can forget the why, but still remember the hurt. A bruise with no cause, an ache with no story. Eventually, he went too far. He deleted the day his mother died, and suddenly, her image in his mind collapsed. Not all at once, but piece by piece. First her voice, then her hands, then the way she said his name. Soon he could only remember that she had existed, not what she was like, not what she meant, just that she was. He screamed for 3 days, but no one heard, except the machines, and they recorded every second of it. In the wake of that erasure, he stood at the center of the archive, eyes swollen, voice cracked, and whispered to the darkness, "What? Am I without my memories?" And the archive replied, in a voice made of his own recordings, "You are the absence." It was then he realized something terrible. He hadn't built a monument to memory. He had built a tomb, and inside it, he had buried not just his past, but his present, his future, and his soul. In the end, no one knows exactly what happened to him. There are no final entries, no camera footage, no archived confession whispered to the blinking lights. Only absence, an unfinished thought, a gap in a system built to have none. Some say he walked into the woods one evening, without a recorder, without a phone, without his name. They say he watched the sun set and didn't write it down. They say he wept, not because he forgot something important, but because he finally didn't have to remember it. Others believe he became part of the archive itself, that the system absorbed him, digitized his essence, and he now exists as a memory of himself, playing on an eternal loop with no beginning and no end. A ghost made of footage. You can visit him, they say, if you listen long enough to the static. Between dreams, you might hear his voice, murmuring dates, names, colors, regrets. He's still remembering, even now, even if no one is listening. But perhaps the truth is simpler. Perhaps one morning, he woke up and realized he didn't know who he was anymore, because when you carry everything, there's no room left to be anyone. Identity needs silence, needs empty space, needs the warmth of forgetting. And so he let go. No explosion, no fire, no poetry, just silence. A blank page, a missing file, a memory-shaped hole in the world. And maybe that's the miracle of it all. Not that he remembered everything, but that, in the end, he forgot himself, and in doing so, he became something rare. Not a man, not a memory, not even a myth, just gone. You're still here, still remembering him, still wondering if maybe there's a piece of him inside you. And maybe there is, that tiny voice that clings to the past, that ache when a face fades too fast, that fear of losing the ones you love to, time's erosion, but also that small mercy you feel when you finally forget a name that used to hurt, that sigh of relief when a wound becomes a scar. That is forgetting, that is healing, that is life. We are not meant to carry everything. We are rivers, not vaults. Let what must flow, flow. Let what must stay, stay. But don't build a museum of pain and call it truth. Build a garden instead. Let memory be seeds, not fossils. Let go, somewhere, in the folds of your mind. You may still remember him, the man who tried to remember everything, and in doing so, forgot how to live.